In my previous video, I went over creating skeletons using Maya's joints. I'm going to go a little more in depth in this video. So I have this mesh that I created from a cylinder, and what I'm doing is I'm creating a skeleton for it in the side viewport. And here is what my skeleton looks like. It's right now you can see that my joints are just called joint 1, 2, 3, and so on. Generally, it's good practice to give your joints unique names, and you can do so under modify, and you can use the prefix hierarchy names or the search and replace names tools to quickly rename the joints in your skeletons. Naming the objects in your scenes makes working in Maya so much easier. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my skeleton, the root of my skeleton, and the mesh, and I'm going to go to Skin, Bind Skin. I'm just resetting the options right now just so that it's the default. And let's see what I've got. Notice that if I select my mesh and I try to move it, I cannot. This is because it is now bound to the skeleton. But if I select the root of my skeleton, I can move it just fine. I can translate it, rotate it, I can scale it. And if I select the various joints in the hierarchy, I can pose it. And not only can I individually select the joints in my hierarchy and pose them, but I can also pose multiple joints at one time. Here I'm just setting my rotations back to 0 to get it back to its original position. And then I'm going to select a bunch of joints and rotate them at one time. Now, one thing I would recommend when doing this is rotate on one axis at a time. It's really not recommended to rotate 3 axes at one time because it'll be very unpredictable. So I'm going to move on to another example. I'm going to hide this one and we'll take a look at a little bit more complicated scenario. So here we've got a very similar shape, however this one looks like it has a left and right arm. I'll speed up the video some as I go through the process of renaming the joints in my hierarchy. Now I'll move on to the arms. My preference when rigging is to get a character in T-pose with the arms parallel to the floor. This makes creating the skeleton easier. I'm going to go to my top viewport and I will create the skeleton chain for the arms. The shoulder, placing the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist. Notice in my front viewport that it's positioned properly in the top viewport but not in the front. So I'm going to take it and raise it up in the front, position it in the middle of the arm. And then selecting the child, the arm, and then its parent, one of the spine joints, I type P. Remember, P for parent. Once again, I'll quickly go through the process of renaming the joints. And then I'll move on to the left arm. Now, because I created a right arm, I can simply mirror it by going to Skeleton, Mirror Joints, opening up the option box so that I see the tool settings. You may need to play around some with the tool settings to get it to mirror on the proper axis. In this case, I need to mirror it on the YZ axis. I can also quickly rename the left arm by replacing, in this case, R underscore by L underscore. And this will quickly rename the left arm so that the left arm joints have their own unique names. And like in the previous example, I'll select the root of my skeleton as well as the mesh, and then go to Skin, Bind Skin. And I'll quickly test the skeleton and the bind. And for default skin weights, it's looking pretty good. I'm now going to move on to a third example. As I mentioned, I prefer when I get a character in T-pose with the arms parallel to the floor. However, that's not always what you get. In this case, I have the arms at a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to show you how we can deal with that. The process for creating the spine is of course identical to the previous two examples. And once again, I'm going to go very quickly through the renaming of the joints in my hierarchy. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can deal with the arms. I'm not going to be able to deal with the arms in the same way that I did in the previous example. Notice that if I create my joint chain from the top, not only will I have to move it in place, but I'll also have to rotate it, and it won't fit. Now, I could try creating the joint chain from the front viewport, and that works a little bit better, but that's not ideal either. If we take a look at it from the top viewport, you'll notice that it also does not really align with the arm, since I actually modeled a bend in the arm. So one way we could deal with that is to change one of the tool settings when we create our joints. So if I go to Skeleton, Create Joints, open up the Tools settings, what I can do is I can check Projected Centering. Let's take a look at what that does. So now, in my perspective viewport, I can click approximately where I feel like the shoulder should be, where the elbow should be, and then to the wrist, where I will click a third time. And I will press enter or right click to complete the chain, and it did a relatively good job. It looked like it has a little bit of a problem around the hand, but I think I'll just live with that for now. And because the steps now are identical to the previous two examples, I'm going to speed through the process of renaming the joints and mirroring the arm, as well as doing the skin bind. So now I'm testing the mesh, and it seems to work pretty well. With these simple fundamentals that I've demonstrated in this video up to this point, you can create a skeleton and bind it to all sorts of different types of creatures. Okay, now let's take a look at the character one more time. This time I've added legs to it. And I'm going to go through this very, very quickly, the whole process of rigging up a character. So first thing I'm doing is I'm renaming my character. I'm calling him Cylindro because he's been entirely constructed out of cylinders. Starting with the root of my skeleton, this is going to be the hips, I'm creating a single joint. That is so that it'll be oriented to the world. And then I will build everything off of that. Here I am creating the spine, the neck, the head joints from the side view. There it is. And of course I'm going to go through the process of renaming everything. Now that I have the spine, the head, the neck joints, and I have the root, which are the hips, I'm going to parent them. I'm going to parent the spine joint to the hip joint. And here's my chain. Now I'll move to the side viewport and start building the legs. In a later video, I'll explain why I like to have the arms and the legs at a slight bend. Moving over to the front viewport, I position the leg in place, centering it with the right leg. And of course, I'll go through the process of renaming it and parenting it to the hip joint. Moving on to the top viewport, I will start creating the arm. Place the shoulder, the elbow, the hand. Go to the front viewport, center it on the right arm, and of course go through the process of renaming the joints. And I want to show you how I can connect it to the spine. However, I'm going to be better off if I create one additional joint. This one will be the clavicle or shoulder joint for my skeleton. This will help with deformation. It'll look better on your animations. Somehow I ended up deleting my right leg. I don't know when I did that. I'll just go ahead and reduplicate the, or mirror the left leg to recreate the right leg. And here is my joint chain, completed. I'll now bind my mesh to the skeleton and quickly test the bind, test my skeleton as well as the skin deformation of my mesh. And it's looking pretty good for an initial bind. As I test the skin weights, I notice, in fact, that I have one slight little problem, which we can take a look at now. So notice that when I move the right leg, it's actually pulling some of the vertices slightly on the left leg as well. So the issue is with skin weights. And to fix that, I'm going to go to Skin, Paint Skin Weights, and open up its tool settings. And let's take a look at what we can see here. So if I select the individual joints in the Paint Skin Weights tool, you'll notice that they have a color associated with them. The color has to do with the effect that each individual joint has on the mesh. The hotter the color, the more effect it has on those vertices. The cooler the color, the less of an effect it has on it. This is a fall off that gives a nice smooth deformation on your meshes when you pose and animate your characters. I can look at the effect that each of the joints has on the vertices on my mesh, either as a color ramp, or if I prefer, I can switch it to a grayscale gradient as well. The brighter the color, the more effect it has on those vertices. Looking at the influences that the joints have on the vertices, I can see that my left leg is affecting the right leg's vertices. What I need to do is eliminate that. One quick fix is to go to Skin, Prune Small Weights. You can keep the number quite small and then apply. This sometimes fixes these problems, but not always. And if we look at the results, you can see that it had some effect, but it didn't completely fix the problem. The left leg is still influencing the right leg slightly. In fact, if I rotate the left leg, you'll see the effect that it's having on the right leg, that it's pulling some of those vertices. I'm going to create a video that goes more in depth into skin weights in the future, but let me show you a quick and easy fix for this problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the vertices on the right leg, and I'm going to go into what is called the component editor. So I'm going to Windows, General Editors, component editor. And here you want to be in smooth skins. Now we can see the information in an exciting spreadsheet. So what we're looking at is on the left side are the vertices that we have selected. Each one is assigned its own unique number. And at the top, we can see the different joints that make up our skeleton. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the two columns that represent the weights of the left leg and left knee, and I will zero those out. That means that I will be eliminating all of the effect. You can see it's minute. It's just a little number here that's being affected on these individual vertices, but it's enough to deform the mesh in a way that would be nice to eliminate. So if I change all those numbers to 0 in those two columns, we should no longer have that effect on the right leg. And let's test it out and see. So if I grab the joint for the right leg and I rotate it, you can see that the left leg, then the right leg looks like it's working very well now. If we look at the actual skin weights, you will see that the bones on the left leg are not influencing any of the vertices any longer on the right leg. Now if I select the right leg and I rotate it, you'll see that it is still influencing some of the vertices on the left leg. So what I'll try to do to fix this is go to Skin, Mirror Skin Weights, and I'll try to mirror the weights from the left side to the right side and see if that fixes this problem. Just to clarify, I'm actually wanting to mirror the character's left to the character's right. Looking at the setting mirror across, I want YZ for it to mirror properly. And after I apply that, I'll check it out and see if it has fixed the problem. And when I rotate the right leg, I see that it in fact has not fixed the problem. So I'll go ahead and just quickly fix it once again using the component editor. I'm going to select the vertices on the left leg, go to my component editor, select smooth skin, and select the columns that have to do with the right leg and its influences on the selected vertices. And when I zero those numbers out, then we should have the problem fixed. And then once you're done doing your skin weights, then you're ready to pose your character. Now, this is a character that is bound to a simple skeleton, so I am only able to use forward kinematics, meaning that everything is, for the most part, rotation on this character. I'll pose my character running. Now that my character is posed, if I wish to get rid of the pose, I can select all my joints and I will just zero out their rotation. This will put the character back into his original position. And finally, if I go to Skeleton, Create IK Handle, and I check Sticky, what I can do is I can select the right leg and select the end of the chain at the foot, and this will create an IK handle. Rather than using FK or forward kinematics to pose the leg, I can now pose it using translation through the IK, inverse kinematics. If I move the hips around, you'll see that the right leg stays planted on the ground. I'll go ahead and create a second chain on the left leg. And as always, I think it's good practice to name the objects in your scenes. IK makes posing your characters, and in particular animating your characters, much easier, especially if you're doing something like a walk cycle or a run cycle, where you need the feet to be planted on the ground at times. I'm testing the IK by grabbing the hip and translating it and rotating it. And the IK also has a channel called Twist, which you can access in the channel box, which will allow you to have independent knee control in this case. Once your character is rigged, not only can you pose it, but you can of course animate it too. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.